The scratches on the wall were deep, and they looked fresh. Imagine waking up in the dead of night. Your eyes adjust to the darkness of your own bedroom, and you can make out the familiar shapes of your furniture, the sliver of moonlight cutting through the blinds. You can hear the low hum of the house, maybe a car passing by outside. You are awake, and yet you're a prisoner inside your own body. You try to move, to speak, to scream, but nothing happens. Your muscles won't obey. You are utterly, completely helpless. For most people who experience this state, known as sleep paralysis, the figures that show up in the shadows are just that, shadows. Tricks of a brain caught somewhere between dreaming and waking. But what if they weren't? Tonight, we have 3 stories. And in the last one, the nightmare doesn't end when you wake up. I've been a back sleeper my entire life. Something I'd later learn is a common trigger for these episodes. For weeks, the stress from my job had been eating away at my sleep, leaving me exhausted but never truly rested. One night, I finally drifted off, only to be violently ripped from my sleep a few hours later. My eyes snapped open. I was staring at the familiar ceiling of my bedroom, but something was deeply wrong. A heavy, crushing stillness was draped over me, pinning me to the mattress. Panic started to bubble up in my chest as I realized I couldn't move a single muscle. My fingers wouldn't twitch. My head wouldn't turn. All I could do was dart my eyes around the room, which suddenly felt alien and hostile. And that's when I saw it. In the far corner, half hidden by a lamp, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, and had no features at all. It was just a silhouette, cut from a fabric that seemed darker than the shadows around it. A man-shaped void. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the otherwise silent room. I told myself it wasn't real. I'd skimmed some articles online, and I knew these were just intruder hallucinations, a common symptom where the brain's threat detection system goes haywire. It was a dream. I just had to wait it out. But the figure didn't stay in the corner. Slowly, with a creeping stillness that was more terrifying than any sudden movement, it began to glide towards my bed. It didn't walk. It just floated over the floor, a silent, menacing presence. My mind was screaming. I strained against my paralyzed limbs, pouring every ounce of my will into just moving, into shouting, into doing anything. But I was still a statue of flesh and bone, a silent observer to my own horror, even heavier than the paralysis. There was no face, no eyes, but I knew with absolute certainty it was looking right at me. Seconds stretched into an eternity. The logical part of my brain was fighting a losing battle with the primal terror coursing through me. I thought about the science, the misfiring neurons, the amygdala conjuring threats from nothing. But science doesn't mean much when a faceless nightmare is standing in your bedroom. I squeezed my eyes shut, a desperate, final attempt to make it go away. If I couldn't see it, it wasn't there. I focused on the sound of my own ragged breathing, the only thing I could control, and counted the heartbeats pounding in my ears. 1, 2, 3. When I finally dared to open my eyes again, it was gone. The corner was empty. The oppressive weight was lifted, and with a sudden, convulsive gasp, I could move again. I shot up in bed, drenched in a cold sweat, my body trembling. The room was just a room. There were no monsters, but I didn't sleep again that night. I'd had the classic sleep paralysis experience. It was horrifying, but it was over. I had no idea how lucky I was. For some, the figures are content to just watch. For others, they want you to feel them. My story starts like the others. I moved into an old townhouse, the kind with good bones and walls that hold a lot of secrets. For the first few months, everything was normal. But the stress of a new job and a new city started to wear on me. One night, I woke up in the familiar prison of sleep paralysis. Body frozen, mind alert. A tall, slender shadow stood near the bookshelf. I had experienced this before, so while I was scared, I wasn't consumed by it. I knew the drill. Stay calm, focus on breathing, wait for it to pass. But as I lay there, I heard something new. A faint, dry, scraping noise. Asterisk TSK. Like a rat in the walls. I wrote it off as another layer to the nightmare. Soon, the paralysis faded, the figure was gone, and the scraping stopped. A few nights later, it happened again. The paralysis slammed into me, and the shadow was back, this time closer to my bed. The fear was stronger now, and then came the sound. Louder, more distinct. It wasn't the frantic scrabbling of a rodent. It was a slow, rhythmic scratching, a long, deliberate drag, a pause, then another. It seemed to be coming from the wall behind my heavy wooden dresser. When I finally broke free, I lay in the dark just listening. The scratching had stopped. The next morning, fueled by a morbid curiosity, I slid the heavy dresser away from the wall to look. My blood ran cold. There on the wallpaper, I saw a thin, vertical scratch. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd done it myself while moving furniture. Maybe it was an old mark I'd just never noticed. I pushed the dresser back, but I couldn't push away the gnawing unease. The visits became a nightly ritual. Every night, I'd wake up paralyzed. Every night, the shadow would be there. And every night, the scratching would begin, growing bolder, more aggressive. I would hear it from the ceiling, the floor, the inside of my closet door. It surrounded me, the soundtrack to my nightly torture. Then came a night that changed everything. I woke paralyzed. The shadow was no longer standing still. It was crouched by the wall near the window. I could make out the shape of long, spindly limbs. I watched in horror as it raised a long finger, a finger that seemed to end in a sharp talon, and pressed the tip against the plaster. I saw it drag the point down the wall. The sound was excruciating, and this time I was watching it happen. It was the sound of something sharp tearing through paint and plaster. It carved a deep, jagged line down the wall, then did it again and again. When the paralysis finally released me, I lunged for the lamp, flooding the room with light. I stared at the wall, my heart about to explode. The scratches I saw weren't faint scuffs. They looked like deep, angry gashes with bits of plaster and with dust clinging to the edges. To me, they were undeniably real. From that night on, the nature of the visits shifted. The entity became more possessive. The paralysis lasted longer. The figure would lean over me, its featureless face just inches from my own. I also started finding things out of place. A book on the floor I'd left on my nightstand. The closet door wide open. Small things that served as a constant, terrifying reminder that I wasn't alone, even when I was awake. The climax arrived on a cold Tuesday night. The paralysis was instant. The creature was perched on my chest, feeling terrifyingly light, like a bundle of dry sticks and cold air. It leaned down, and for the first time, it spoke. Its voice was a chorus of dry whispers and crackling static that seemed to scratch at the inside of my skull. It whispered my name. Then it raised its spindly hand, not to the wall but to my chest. I watched, helpless, as the talon descended. I didn't feel pain, but I felt the sensation of it, a cold, pulling pressure as it dragged the point across my skin. I felt like it was marking me, claiming me. The entity stayed there, pinning me down, until the first rays of morning light touched it, and it seemed to dissolve back into the shadows. I could finally move. With a trembling hand, I pulled at the collar of my t-shirt, dreading what I might find. There on my chest, I saw them, 3 long, red scratches. They were shallow, but to my horror, they were bleeding. The line between the nightmare and the waking world had been completely erased for me. I moved out the next day. The scratches on my chest took weeks to fade, and even now, years later, I sometimes wake up with the phantom feeling of a cold touch and the faint, distant sound of something scratching at the walls. It was December 19th, 2022, the day after the World Cup final. Everyone was talking about Messi finally winning. Twitter was still full of memes and posts about it. I remember because I stayed up late scrolling, reliving the highlights, watching reactions. It was around 3:30 a.m. when I finally crashed on my couch in the living room. I didn't even bother turning off the TV. It was paused on some random YouTube video. I remember the warmth of the blanket, the faint light from the TV, and the hum of the heater. That's the last normal thing I remember before everything changed. At some point, I woke up, or at least I thought I did. The TV was off now. The room was dark except for the orange glow from the streetlight outside. I could see the reflection of that light stretching across the floor tiles. Then I realized something strange. I couldn't move. Not my arms, not my legs. It was like my brain was awake, but my body didn't get the message. For a few seconds, I didn't panic. I thought maybe I just slept weirdly on my arm or something. But then I felt it, this crushing weight on my chest. Not pain, just pressure, like something invisible was sitting on me. And that's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, dragging, coming from the kitchen. It wasn't the sharp sound of bare feet. It was more like the shuffle of someone wearing wet socks. Each step stuck to the floor with a faint squelch. I tried to turn my head toward the sound, but I couldn't. My eyes were the only thing I could move, darting toward the reflection on the black TV screen. That's when I saw it. A figure, tall, hunched, completely still, just standing there in the reflection behind the couch. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then it started to move. The way it walked wasn't normal. Its limbs seemed to drag, and its head tilted unnaturally to one side. It stopped right behind me. I could feel the cold air on the back of my neck, like someone was breathing there. Then, clear as day, a voice whispered, "You stayed up too late again." It wasn't loud. It was low and rasped, almost like a whisper directly in my ear. I tried to scream, to thrash, anything, but I couldn't. My heart was hammering so violently that I could feel it shaking my ribs. The voice came again, closer this time, and then it laughed. That laugh didn't sound human. It started as a snicker and then grew, a wet, broken sound like someone trying to laugh through a cracked throat. My vision started to blur as I felt something brush against my face. I realized it was a hand, cold and damp, like the skin of a dead fish. Then, just as I thought I was about to black out, the room flashed. The TV turned itself on. The sudden burst of light filled the room, and for a split second, I saw it clearly in the reflection. A tall, pale figure with black eyes, skin like ash, and a stretched mouth that looked almost sewn at the corners. It leaned toward the screen and whispered something I couldn't understand before disappearing as quickly as it appeared. I shot up, gasping. My whole body jolted like I'd been thrown into myself. The TV was back to its normal black screen. Everything was silent again. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to convince myself it was just sleep paralysis, just my brain half awake. But when I finally worked up the courage to stand and turn off the TV, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. 2 handprints. Large, smeared, oily-looking handprints on the screen, like someone had leaned against it with wet palms. I just froze there. I don't know how long I stared before I finally wiped them off. The glass felt warm. That night, I didn't go back to sleep. I sat on the couch until the sun came up, every creak in the house making my heart jump. It's been almost 2 years since that night, and I've never fallen asleep on that couch again. I moved it to the corner of the room where it doesn't face the TV anymore. And sometimes late at night, I still hear faint dragging footsteps from the kitchen. I try to tell myself it's the house settling or the heater clicking on. But deep down, I know that voice wasn't my imagination. It was something that waited until I couldn't move, something that knew I was awake. Sleep paralysis is a documented medical phenomenon, a strange glitch in our brain's wiring. Science can explain the immobility, the fear, and the terrifying visions. But it has a harder time accounting for stories like Ethan's, where the experience is so powerful, so visceral, that it leaves behind what feels like physical proof. It's a reminder that for the person living through it, the line between a nightmare and reality can vanish completely. Sleep paralysis is a surprisingly common experience. If you have a story you feel needs to be told, you can send it to the email in the description below. We might feature it in a future video. For more tales that explore the darkness just beyond our understanding, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Sleep well.